She told me to go be someone else's problem after using my name to fund her dream bakery. So I served her a subpoena with a red velvet cupcake. Now I own the bakery, and business is sweet. What happened next will shock you. But before we continue, hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. I am Francis, and I am 69 years old. I raised my daughter Marla with the kind of care you don't learn from books, the kind that comes from long nights, scraped knees, and showing up when no one else does. I held her hand through every heartbreak, paid for her college with my pension withdrawals, and even let her small family move in when money got tight. At first, it was meant to be temporary. She said it was just until they got back on their feet, and I believed her because believing her was something I had always done. But months passed, and little things started to shift. My things went missing. My chair in the living room was quietly replaced. She told me my cooking was too salty, my stories too long, my voice too loud. I became something tolerated, not loved. And then, one afternoon, after I asked about the electricity bill being unpaid, she rolled her eyes and muttered the words that still rattle in my chest. Go be someone else's problem. Just like that. As if I were a bag left at the curb, something broken that no longer fit her curated life. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply stood there, letting the weight of those words settle in the silence she created. That night, while they laughed downstairs, and I sat in the small guest room they had shoved me into, I made a list, not of grievances or heartbreaks, but of every single document I had kept through the years, the house deed, the mortgage slips I paid off, the emails where I co-signed her car loan. I wasn't planning revenge. I was remembering. I was reminding myself that I had not survived wars inside and outside my home to be discarded by the very person I gave life to. So while she scrolled through social media and posted filtered snapshots of a family she pretended to hold together, I was quietly gathering the tools I needed to reclaim my place. Because when someone tells you to be someone else's problem, sometimes you nod, smile, and become exactly that, but with lawyers, receipts, and a spine they forgot you had. That day didn't break me. It wrote the first sentence of the story they never saw coming, and I intend to finish it on my terms. After Marla told me to go be someone else's problem, I sat in my tiny kitchen with lukewarm tea and a silence that stretched like elastic between grief and grit. It took a few days before the fog lifted enough for me to see what I had really been left with, and it wasn't just heartbreak. I started combing through my paperwork out of habit more than anything, not even sure what I was looking for, but the more I pulled up old emails and letters, the more something inside me itched. I remembered co-signing something years back when she said her bakery needed a little push, just a safety net, she said, for a few months. She was crying that day, sitting on my floral love seat with mascara on her cheek and promises on her lips. I had said yes, like any mother would, thinking love was a good enough currency for trust. But now, with distance and clarity as my companions, I opened an envelope marked delinquent notice and saw my name printed in bold next to an unpaid balance I had never touched. My heart sank like a stone dropped in a well. Marla had taken out a business loan in my name, and not only had she failed to make payments, she had never told me when things went south. The bakery had quietly closed months ago, and she never said a word. The letters had been rerouted to her address. She intercepted them. I only got this one because they escalated it to collections. I called the bank and confirmed it all. My name, my debt, her betrayal. It felt like someone had walked across my chest with muddy boots. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by printouts, feeling the weight of every time I said yes when I should have asked more questions. I remembered the way she used to call me her rock, her biggest supporter. Turns out, she meant it literally. I had been the foundation she stood on while she climbed, and when the house crumbled, she left me under the rubble. I wasn't just dealing with abandonment. I was dealing with fraud. My own daughter had turned me into a liability. I stared at the documents and thought, this isn't love. This is theft with a smile. And if she thought I was going to stay quiet, she forgot who raised her. The envelope was thick, the kind of paper that carries bad news in a suit and tie. When I opened it, my fingers trembled, not from weakness, but from a strange kind of quiet rage I had not felt in decades. Inside was a letter from a debt collector, formal and unfeeling, as if the person behind it had no idea they were peeling open someone's trust like a wound. It confirmed everything I already feared, but seeing it in black and white made it more real than I was prepared for. The bakery loan, the unpaid balance, the accumulating interest, and worse, the signature. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. The way the F looped, the slant of the letters, the flourishes at the end, all too careful, too perfect, like someone had practiced over and over again until they could mimic me. It was forged. Not borrowed, not mistaken, but forged with the kind of precision that can only come from proximity. From someone who had watched you write checks for school trips and holiday gifts, who knew your handwriting like they knew your birthday, Marla had used my credit to build that bakery. All those photos she used to post of the grand opening, the ribbon cutting, the cupcakes lined up like little dreams, were built on fraud. Built on my name, my history, my reputation. I sat back in my chair and stared at the window, watching the neighbour's tree sway in the breeze as if the world hadn't just tilted under me. The betrayal clung to my skin like humidity. Not just because of the money, though that was bad enough, but because it made me question every memory. Every thank you, every hug, every late-night call where she cried about failure, and I listened like a lifeline. All of it felt painted now, coated in something slick and insincere. I held the letter to my chest and whispered to myself, not in anger, but in finality. This was no longer about what she owed me. This was about what I owed myself. Dignity. Peace. Closure. She had taken my name and used it like a ladder, then pulled it out from under me when she reached the roof. But I was still standing. Maybe slower. Maybe softer. But not broken. I folded the letter neatly and slid it into a folder marked with a single word I had not used in years. Justice. The smell of sugar and butter hit me before I even stepped through the door. Marla's bakery was everything the town loved to fawn over, with its pastel awnings and handwritten chalkboard specials and cupcakes that looked like they belonged in a Parisian window. Little girls twirled in front of the display case, couples took selfies with their lattes, and local bloggers raved about the woman who had risen from nothing. Self-made, they called her. Inspirational. A phoenix in an apron. I stood in the corner with my cardigan buttoned up to my neck, clutching a shopping bag like any other customer. But inside I held the truth. Tucked beneath a paper napkin and a used library book were copies of the loan application. The forged signature, the withdrawal slips, all traced back to my name. I had walked into this place once, when she first opened, and I remember how she introduced me to her staff as a family friend. Not her mother. Not the person who babysat her son for free when she was building this place. Not the name behind the credit. Just someone who happened to be in the periphery of her perfect little success story. I looked around and took in the shimmering fairy lights and glass jars of meringues and tiny, overpriced macarons that looked too pretty to eat. People smiled. They sipped and complimented. They had no idea that everything around them was baked with fraud and betrayal and the kind of nerve only someone without shame could pull off. I had the documents now. Every signature, every bank statement, every quiet lie that grew into this pink empire. The woman behind the counter wasn't a visionary. She was a thief. wearing buttercream. I didn't need to shout or cause a scene. I had already taken the first steps. The lawyer had the files. The authorities would have them next. And as I walked out, a cupcake box in hand that I didn't even want, I caught a glimpse of her smiling for a photo with a reporter. Her arm around a charity sponsor, her eyes lit with the kind of brightness that doesn't come from joy, but from performance. Let her smile. Let her believe the frosting would cover the cracks. Because soon, the truth would be served. Not on a platter, but in court. And this time, it would not be sweet. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of lemon cookies, which I later learned came from a gift box Marla had sent over months ago. She brings a new box every holiday, he said, motioning to the pastel tin on the edge of his desk. Criminally good, he joked, popping the lid open and offering me one. I didn't smile. I told him they were criminal all right, just not in the way he meant. I handed over the folder I had assembled, thick with copies of the loan application, side-by-side signature comparisons, email printouts, even a bank transfer she once asked me to approve, promising she'd pay it back within a week. He flipped through them slowly, his humor softening as the truth settled like a stone in the room. She took out the loan using your social, he asked, though it was more of a statement than a question. I nodded. He pulled a notepad closer. You've got a case, he said after a long breath. And not just a quiet one. This is public. This is press-worthy. She built a business off your identity. She forged a federal document. This isn't just a civil dispute. This is felony fraud. I watched him underline the word felony on his pad, the ink bold and certain. He asked if I wanted to pursue criminal charges, if I wanted to go after restitution, if I wanted to keep it quiet or make it known. I told him I hadn't decided yet, that I wanted the truth more than I wanted revenge, that I wasn't out for blood, just justice. He looked at me like I was something rare, like he hadn't heard a client say that in a long time. Well, truth has a way of echoing louder than revenge ever could, he said, and then paused. But sometimes they sound the same. I looked at the cupcake tin again, the icing, perfect treats wrapped in ribbon, and thought about how many people she had fooled with sugar and charm. I thought about how many times I had excused her ambition as survival, how many holidays I had baked beside her, never knowing she was also baking a lie. Let's proceed, I said finally. Let the courts taste what I have tasted. He nodded and slid the folder into his briefcase. As I left, he offered me a cupcake again. I declined. I had swallowed enough sweetness that turned bitter. It was time someone else got a bite. I walked into Marla's bakery just after noon, when the line curled out the door and the scent of vanilla and burnt sugar hung thick in the air like perfume pretending to be innocence. She was behind the counter, smiling the way she used to when she wanted something, wearing that soft pink apron with her name embroidered like royalty. The crowd buzzed with compliments and credit cards, mothers with toddlers, teens with phones out for TikTok shots, and the occasional suited man trying to look casual. I took my place in line, clutching the small envelope in my handbag, the paper still warm from the lawyer's office, like it carried heat from the truth it held. When it was finally my turn, Marla glanced up, clearly expecting just another order, until recognition flickered like a faulty light bulb in her eyes. Francis, she said, with a voice like frosting too sweet to swallow. I smiled politely and pointed to the menu. 1 red velvet, please. She hesitated but rang it up, hands suddenly less steady. As she boxed the cupcake and slid it across, I reached into my bag, pulled out the subpoena, and laid it gently on the counter like it was a thank you note. Looks like I'm your problem again, I said, my voice low but clear. Her face drained of colour, just for a second, before the performance kicked in. What is this? she asked, already knowing, already reading the bold words at the top. The people behind me shifted, their curiosity growing like yeast in a warm oven. I leaned closer, not for drama, but for certainty. It's the cost of stealing someone's name and pretending it was your own. I picked up the cupcake and turned to leave, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room press against my back. I didn't look back, not even when someone asked if she was okay, or when I heard her manager call her name. Outside, I took one bite of the cupcake and then tossed it into the nearest bin, red crumbs scattering like spilled secrets. The sweetness was there, but it tasted like pretense, like a lie with sprinkles. As I walked away, my heels clicking on the pavement with a rhythm that felt like punctuation, I realized justice does not always wear a robe or carry a gavel. Sometimes it wears sensible shoes, orders dessert, and delivers truth in the middle of a lunch rush. The first headline ran on a local blog, known for reviewing brunch spots and tracking down gossip faster than wildfire in a dry field. Local baker, sued by ex-boyfriend over alleged fraud. Within hours, it was on the front page of the city section, then reshared by a dozen foodies who had once called her pastries heaven in a box. The comments started trickling in like sugar from a tipped bag, and not all of them were kind. I kept quiet at first, letting the article speak for itself, letting the words forged signature and fraudulent loan echo into the places frosting could not cover. But Marla, ever the performer, could not help herself. She posted a statement on the bakery's Instagram, an image of a cupcake with a broken heart emoji and a caption that read, "When toxic exes can't let go, they try to ruin what you built." Her fans flooded the comments with hearts and crying faces, calling her brave, calling me bitter, until I opened my own social media account and posted a carousel of scanned documents. First, the loan application with her handwriting. Then, a photo of the notarized bank letter confirming the fraud. Finally, an email between her and a supplier where she bragged about getting approved, thanks to someone's squeaky clean credit. I did not add a caption. I let the paper do the talking. It took less than an hour for the tide to turn. Comments disappeared from her post. Then her post disappeared entirely. Someone tagged me in a story of the bakery, with its blinds drawn and a sign that read "closed for the day." By evening, another blogger ran a piece titled, "When Cupcakes Crumble: The Lawsuit Shaking Sugar and Sage Bakery." It featured side-by-side screenshots of her deleted post and my receipts. I poured myself a cup of tea and watched it unfold like a slow-motion cake collapse. The frosting had cracked. The pretty pastel branding had melted under the weight of real truth. And Marla, for all her curated charm, could not stop the facts from rising to the surface like poorly buried dough. People can decorate deceit all they want, but sooner or later, reality bakes through. And in that moment, I understood something simple and powerful. You cannot build a sweet empire on stolen sugar and expect it not to rot from the inside. It started with a ping at midnight, that soft chime of a message sliding in like a whisper that hoped I was still awake. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she wrote. "It was all a misunderstanding. No apology. Not really. Just vague fog, rolled into neat sentences, meant to soften the truth." I read it twice, then once more, and still couldn't find the word sorry anywhere. She followed with a string of messages, each one more frantic than the last, layered with justifications, excuses, and half-hearted confessions tucked between digital sighs. I panicked. "I didn't think you'd find out. I was going to fix it." She said everything except what mattered. The public posts vanished quietly the next morning, like footprints in sand washed away by guilt. But the internet remembers. People had already screenshot them, shared them, dissected them, like forensic experts pulling sugar-coated lies apart. Her followers, once loyal, now sounded less sweet. "This is disappointing," one wrote. "How can you call yourself self-made?" asked another. I watched the likes dry up. I watched the shares shift tone. And then the most telling sign of all happened. She turned off the comment section. That bakery account, once full of pastel hearts and glitter captions, became a museum of silence. Meanwhile, my inbox filled with messages too, but not from her. Strangers, women, older folks, young professionals, all of them telling me they believed me, that someone had done something similar to them, that it felt good to see someone push back. I did not respond to Marla, not to her midnight texts or the ones that came after noon. I had no desire to play therapist to a woman who only reached for remorse when the lights went out. Regret is a cheap currency when it comes too late. The truth had been out for less than 48 hours, and already the frosting was sliding off the walls of her carefully piped empire. No more pink ribbons and filtered quotes. Just debt, silence, and accountability knocking at her door. I stayed quiet, kept sipping my coffee, while the storm she brewed with lies swirled above her like a cloud no filter could hide. She thought the damage could be erased with a few deletions and a message or two, but I knew better. Words have weight, and once spoken, they hang in the air like smoke that clings to everything it touches. Court was colder than I remembered. Not the temperature, but the air of it. Sharp and indifferent, like a room built for slicing through performance and peeling truth from gloss. Marla walked in wearing beige and pretending not to see me, her lawyer glued to her side like frosting piped too thick. He was younger than I expected, slick in a navy suit and full of confidence, smiling like this would be an easy cleanup. He started with charm, called the whole thing a misunderstanding, said the financial mix-up was the byproduct of a close relationship gone sour. Messy but not malicious, he said with a grin. But my lawyer, an older woman with sharp eyes and shoes that echoed when she walked, didn't waste time with sugar. She laid out documents like cards at a poker table, loan agreements with my forged signature, bank statements with charges I never authorized, email exchanges where Marla promised she'd handle it. The judge didn't blink much. He nodded, listened, asked only a few questions. When Marla's lawyer tried to argue intent, the judge raised one hand, slow and heavy, and said, "Intent does not erase signature fraud." That was it. No dramatics. No gavel slam. Just words. Flat and final. Marla looked smaller then. Her shoulders caved slightly. She kept touching her necklace, the one she always wore like armor, but it didn't shine quite as bright under courtroom lighting. I watched her avoid my gaze, shifting like a child who finally understood the test wasn't multiple choice. The bakery's books were subpoenaed, her emails reviewed, her digital fingerprints were everywhere, and the moment the judge said the words, "liable for damages," I exhaled. Not a loud breath, but one I had been holding since the day she told me to go be someone else's problem. That courtroom wasn't a battlefield. It was a bakery with the lights turned on and the recipes exposed. Her cupcakes might have tasted sweet, but the ingredients behind them were rotten. Outside, reporters asked questions. I gave no quotes. I just walked away with the truth finally folded into legal paper, sealed with ink, and stamped by a system that, for once, sided with the quiet one who kept the receipts. And Marla, well, she had a lot more to worry about than buttercream and branding. She had a reputation to repair and a debt to repay. The ruling hit her like a wrecking ball dipped in sugar. The court ordered her to repay the full amount of the loan, plus damages, interest, and legal fees. She tried to keep her face neutral when the judge read the decision, but I saw the twitch in her jaw and the way her hands clenched into the folds of her designer skirt. That night, her bakery posted an Instagram story with a pastel background and the words, "Closed for renovations" in loopy font. But I knew it wasn't renovations that made the ovens go cold. It was consequence. Her accounts were frozen the next morning. Not drained, not seized, just frozen, like someone had taken her entire livelihood and locked it in a freezer where no amount of warm smiles or cupcake specials could melt it back. Customers arrived to a locked door and a sign taped to the glass. No explanation, no refunds, just silence, and the echo of frosting dreams. I drove past the shop once. Just once. Not out of spite, but because I needed to see it. The pink chairs on the patio were still arranged like dolls waiting for tea, but no one was pouring. The scent of cinnamon and butter no longer floated down the sidewalk. It had all gone stale. Her social media accounts went quiet, too. No more boomerangs of piping bags or videos of her sprinkling edible glitter onto lemon bars. Instead, her last post was a carousel of cupcakes, with a caption about taking time to reflect and reset. Comments flooded in. Some supporters, some skeptics, most confused. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The court had spoken louder than I ever could. She had used my name to build her brand, but the foundation had been cracked from the beginning, and now the whole thing was crumbling under the weight of the truth. I never wanted to destroy her, only to be repaid and remembered for what I was owed. But sometimes, when people try to frost over fraud with charm, the whole cake collapses. She learned that too late. I took no joy in her struggle, but I did feel something close to peace. A quiet kind of justice. The kind that does not come with confetti or applause, but with the steady click of a courtroom door closing, and the knowledge that for the first time in a long time, I was not invisible. I was undeniable. The town didn't erupt into outrage overnight, but slowly, like sugar dissolving into hot tea, it changed. Whispers crept through the farmer's market. Hushed conversations bloomed in church pews and hair salons. At first, it was just curiosity, the kind that makes people tilt their heads and say, "Did you hear?" But soon, curiosity turned to quiet judgment, and judgment to cautious distance. They still remembered her lemon bars, the flaky crust and tart filling that once won over city hall bake-offs. But now each bite came with a bitter aftertaste. No one wanted to say it outright. Yet they said it with their eyes, with their shortened conversations, with the way they clicked their tongues and changed the subject when her name came up. The woman who used to be the darling of the Chamber of Commerce now walked into the coffee shop and felt the weight of glances that didn't linger long enough to be polite. Some defended her, called it a mistake, a misunderstanding, but even they spoke more softly than before, like their own certainty was thinning. The article in the local paper didn't help. It ran with a plain headline and dry language, but the facts were facts. Fraud, forgery, restitution. Her bakery had once symbolized something sweet and homegrown, a story of local success built from nothing. Now, it was a cautionary tale shared between bites of scones and behind polite smiles. Her pastel branding no longer masked the cracks. The more she tried to act like nothing had changed, the more obvious it became that everything had. Parents stopped ordering cupcakes for birthday parties. Couples chose other bakeries for their weddings. The catering board quietly removed her name from its preferred vendor list. It was not a fall from grace. Not exactly. More like a soft erasure. The kind you don't notice until one day you look up and see someone's been replaced. I didn't gloat. I didn't send links or repost headlines. I simply went about my life, aware that justice sometimes works like yeast. It rises slowly, subtly, until it fills the room. And now the air was thick with it. She could still bake. She could still smile. But the trust had melted, and no frosting could hide that. Reputation, like sugar, holds its shape until it is exposed to heat. And in this town, the oven had been on for quite some time. It came in a plain envelope, the kind most people toss without opening, assuming it is junk or a scam. But I opened it. And for the first time in months, I smiled. A pre-approval letter, with my name spelled correctly, my score in bold, no fine print designed to trap me. Just clean, crisp numbers, and the quiet validation that I was no longer tethered to a lie someone else wrote in my name. The loan she took out, the one that tied knots in my credit and left me gasping for breath each time I checked my bank account, was finally removed. Scrubbed from the record like it had never happened. Except it did. It happened, and I lived every second of it. But now, for the first time, I was breathing in clean air. My lawyer called it a technical correction. I called it liberation. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the letter in hand, the same table where she once told me her bakery dreams, where I signed papers out of love without reading closely enough. I held that letter and thought of all the times I was told to wait, to be patient, that the system moves slow. It did move slow, but it moved. And now I had proof. Proof that lies can be erased, and that truth, however delayed, can still arrive wearing the right name. My credit report, once a battlefield of red flags and damage, now looked like a blank canvas again. My phone rang less with unknown numbers. My sleep was deeper. The weight that had lived behind my ribs for too long had finally lifted. I walked into a bank a week later, just to see if I could. Just to test the world that once turned its back. The clerk smiled, called me Miss Francis. She didn't flinch when she pulled up my file. She offered me coffee, options, respect. I left with a brochure, not because I needed it, but because I could. That night, I sat by the window with tea in hand and whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular, not to the banks, not to the courts, but to the woman who refused to let her name be dragged behind someone else's success. I had scrubbed more than credit. I had reclaimed my worth. And now, it was spotless. Starting the consultancy felt less like launching a business and more like rewriting a chapter that had once ended in betrayal. I sat at my dining room table, the same one where I used to sign checks for someone else's dreams, and this time I designed something of my own. I named it True Ledger, because every lie deserves a reckoning, and every victim deserves a clean slate. I filed the paperwork, registered the name, bought the domain, and called the same lawyer who helped me take my life back. "Looks like you're switching seats," he said with a smile. I was. I was no longer the woman being called by collectors, no longer waking up in the middle of the night trying to make sense of transactions I never made. I was the one others could now call, the one who understood what it felt like to be gaslighted by someone you loved, financially handcuffed by someone who swore they cared. I ordered business cards in a muted cream with black lettering, professional but warm. On the front, my name and title. On the back, in soft cursive, "You are not the problem." I chose those words because I needed them once, and no one said them to me. I wanted every person who held that card to feel seen, even before they walked through my door. My first client was a woman in her 40s who had co-signed a car loan with a man who disappeared 2 months later. She cried during our first consultation, but by the end of the hour she sat taller. We filed a report, disputed the charges, and began the long road of repair. One by one, they came. Women. Men. older folks. A young man whose partner had drained his inheritance. A mother whose daughter used her name for credit cards. All of them walked in with shame wrapped around their shoulders, and all of them left with something closer to clarity. I kept the cupcakes she once baked for me as a distant memory. And in their place, I put out a bowl of individually wrapped hard candies and a note beside it that read, "For strength." It was a quiet nod to everyone who ever believed they had to swallow betrayal in silence. My office wasn't grand, but it was mine. And each time someone read the back of my card and let out that first exhale, I knew I had done something right. Months passed quietly, the way healing often does, not with fanfare, but with steady breath and rebuilt routines. Then I heard through a friend that her bakery was on the market. Word had spread that business had dried up like old batter left too long in the bowl. The locals no longer lined up for her pastel dreams. She was trying to cut her losses. I sat with that knowledge, turning it over like a warm stone in my hand. Then I called my lawyer, the one who had first tasted her lies frosted in vanilla and called them criminal. We set up an anonymous LLC. Clean. Untraceable. I signed the paperwork with the same pen she once used to forge my name. But this time, the ink was mine. It felt strange walking back into that bakery, empty of customers but still sticky with old memories. The walls were the same shade of pink, but the sweetness in the air had turned sour with ghosted apologies. I didn't gut the place. I didn't need to. I kept the counters, the display case, the open shelves. What I changed was the name on the door. I had it hand-lettered by a local artist in deep navy cursive. The problem? No subtitle. No explanation. Just that. A mirror held up to her words. On opening day, the line wrapped around the corner. Some came for the curiosity, others for the symbolism. I only served one flavor that day, a dark chocolate cupcake with a rich espresso center and a tiny fondant envelope on top. I called it Justice. It sold out within hours. Customers laughed at the name, snapped photos, whispered their own stories of betrayal into the air as they sipped their coffee. I stood behind the counter, not as a victim, but as a woman who had baked her own ending. No resentment, just ownership. A teenage girl asked me if I was the woman from the article. I smiled and handed her a cupcake. "I'm the reason this place is still open," I said. And I was. I had taken back what was taken from me, not in anger but in clarity. The space was no longer hers, no longer a monument to her lies. It was mine now, rebranded and reborn. And every time someone bit into that cupcake, they tasted what happens when the problem finds her voice and answers back. The day of the grand reopening arrived with the smell of espresso, vanilla, and something sharp beneath it all. Like thunder waiting far off in the mountains. I wore a soft grey blouse and flats that didn't pinch, standing behind the counter of the bakery I now owned, chatting with the new staff and watching the morning light creep across the floor like it was testing the new energy in the room. People came early, some with curiosity, others with solidarity. Old women clutching canvas totes smiled as they tasted the cupcakes. A man in a navy suit nodded at the name on the sign and said, "Well played." I poured coffee, passed napkins, and didn't have to say a word because the space spoke for itself. Then, just before noon, as the sun slid over the awning and made the windows glow like old church glass, I saw her, Marla, my daughter. She stood across the street, not dressed like herself. No pastel, no bakery apron, just jeans and a cardigan that hung too loose at the elbows. Her hair was pulled back like she didn't want to be seen, but came anyway. Maybe curiosity brought her. maybe shame. Her eyes swept over the sign, the crowd, the line of people waiting with laughter in their mouths and justice on their tongues. When our eyes met, something in her face broke for a second. Not tears, not rage, just the brief, hollow look of someone who realizes the story has moved on without them. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just nodded once. A slow, deliberate gesture that said, "I see you, but I owe you nothing." She didn't cross the street. She didn't try to enter. She turned and walked away like a page fluttering loose in the wind, forgotten by the book it fell from. And I went back to wiping the counter, handing out cupcakes, and listening to the sound of a business humming with purpose. That was the closure. Not a conversation, not a hug or a scream, or some teary confession. Just her walking past, and me not stopping her. Healing had arrived not with warmth, but with stillness, with silence that didn't beg to be filled. And in that moment, I knew I had become the woman she underestimated, the one she pushed aside. And now, I was the one who held the door, locked or open. That choice belonged to me.